this morning we have Marina Bad all the way from Crest, and she's going to tell us more about how to use your science and engage with the community. Thank you.
Okay. Right, so good morning. Thank you very much for joining us for this session. I've got a few restrictions. One of those being that the session is being recorded, so I can't move too far away from here, but I would like to keep it a little bit interactive. So I think we have enough time. If you have a question or a burning issue, you're more than welcome to let me know, and we can have a discussion about that as well. And there will be time at the end, I hope, as well, for some questions. So for the past about 20, 25 years, depending on how you count it, I worked as a science communication practitioner in the industry for various organizations, the National Research Foundation and various universities, also for some years at the Square Kilometre Array South Africa project. And then about 2 years ago, I had the wonderful opportunity that I'm very, very grateful for to come back to Stellenbosch University and sort of start a second career or a new lease on life as a researcher in this field. So I'm passionate about communicating science, but being a researcher, moving into the academic world has also taught me to be a little bit more critical about communicating science. Why we're really doing it, what really the true motives and objectives behind it are, and also how to really reflect on this relationship between science and society. So today I'm going to try and just briefly give you a little bit of a teaser about what science communication is all about, what is the best practice that we know of today, where can you get started, and why should you care about it. And really it is just an introduction, and at the end I'll give you a few places where you can find out more and where we can continue the conversation and the networking. So when we talk about public communication of science, and generally just the term science communication, we are referring to that kind of science communication that goes outside the scientific community. So it's not about your peer-reviewed articles, it's not about your conferences where you're going to present, it's about engaging with audiences that don't normally reach or are not normally engaging with science. So it's about the public, about policy, about youth groups, about NGOs, and very important also policymakers. And it is, my definition of science communication is making your research visible, accessible, meaningful, and relevant. And if you unpack all of those words, it's quite a lot. I mean, visibility is hard to achieve in today's media world. Accessibility means that the language and the style you use must be possible for people to understand, but it also has to be available to them. They must be able to get to it. Meaningful and relevant means that you've got to find ways of linking your research or connecting your research with people's everyday lives. So it's not easy. It's not a question of dumbing down your science. It's actually, if you really go and look at what it requires, it's actually much harder than people may think. Now, traditionally, a lot of this communication from scientists to the general public has been kind of top-down one way. There was a movement in the UK and around the world that was known as the Public Understanding of Science movement, where governments and research organizations and universities invested large amounts of money. And the idea behind it was, if we can only tell the public about the research we do, they're going to support us, they're going to love the science, they're going to like what they hear, and they will actually support and embrace new technologies and research. And the idea was that the public out there, what I try to illustrate with this drawing is, you know, they don't know much about science, they're kind of ignorant, they're almost a little bit stupid maybe, and if we can just fill their heads with lots of our information, they're going to love us and support us. And this became known in academic sort of science communication reflection as the so-called deficit model, from the expert to the public. One way, no questions asked. And for many reasons, of course, this didn't work out. You know, when I'm talking to a group of you like here today, you don't come into the room with empty heads. You already have your own ideas and views and questions about science communication, and the same is true for any other topic. So giving people a lot of information and a lot of facts will actually lead to different responses in different people, depending on their own worldviews, their own belief systems, their own prior knowledge, their past experiences, and so on. And therefore, people realized, and this has been documented well in a number of studies, that actually this kind of approach can backfire. You could actually achieve the opposite effect of what you're looking out to do. By giving people just loads of information, you may actually make them more critical, more skeptical, and more negative about your research. And therefore, the current buzzword in the field is a term that we call public engagement with science. And public engagement emphasizes the two-way, the conversation, the dialogue between science and society. It emphasizes that scientists must create opportunities and try as far as possible to also listen to the audiences that they're trying to engage, to understand their concerns and their expectations of science, and also to enrich their own research with the public input. And the sort of official definition of public engagement is meaningful, deliberate, intentional interactions between science and society with a view to create mutual benefit between the scientists and the public audiences that they engage with. So what we see these days, from universities, from funders, from research organizations, from society itself, calls are mounting for scientists to step out of the ivory tower and engage and make their work visible. It's no longer good enough to say, I'm a scientist, leave me alone, I didn't sign up for this. There's definitely an increasing demand and pressure on scientists to do this. Why has science communication become such a hot topic? Maybe just briefly to reflect on that. And when you try and analyze the reasons, in a way, it all comes down to the changing relationship between science and society and increasing competition. There's definitely competition for public attention. I mean, universities are competing with one another to get the best profile, to attract the best students. There's competition for resources. Every researcher knows, to get funding, you are competing with others, and having a public profile can make a big difference there. There's public support needed for science. There's so many examples of new technologies and research that's been stopped in its tracks if the public resist it or have some other problems with it. So there's the idea for competing for public support. Legitimacy is about big universities, research organizations having to justify their public spending because after all, they use public money to fund research in most cases. And then as more and more controversial topics emerge in science, and I'm talking here about genetically modified foods, cloning, stem cell research, nanotechnology, these controversies have also thrust the science-society relationship into the limelight and have actually almost demanded of scientists to become more engaged and to join the public debate and dialogue about this. And then last but not least, there's a big move inside science communication in terms of the PR value of communicating science. And this is about universities investing quite a lot of money and other research organizations in appointing expert communicators to sell the science that is done inside that institution. And this is done with a view to attract money, to attract collaborators, to attract funders, and once again also to attract public support and political support. So science PR or marketing has become a big industry. This is a hot topic in science communication circles because there's many ways to categorize it, but broadly speaking, there's concern about this kind of promotion of science, which only tells people about the good parts of science versus more critical voices about science. Now, traditionally, the critical voice came from journalists, the mass media. If you had science journalists, they're the ones who would ask questions. Is it really right to spend so much money on this kind of project? What about the communities that are affected by this kind of research? Those kind of questions. And you can't expect universities to be critical about their own research. You can't expect research funders to be critical about the research they fund. So there's a lot of concern in the international science communication community that the critical voice is being overshadowed by the promotional PR kind of voice in science communication. And of course, one of the reasons why is that the number of science journalists are dwindling worldwide and also in South Africa as the mass media is going through a crisis of its own and the sort of science communication landscape is changing. I saw some interesting figures from Germany, just as an example, where they say about 10 years ago there were about 100 of professional media officers, science media officers in German universities. And 10 years later, that number has increased to more than 2,000 that are employed by universities to communicate science. And many of those are journalists who lost their jobs in the mass media and have moved into universities to do this PR job. And they know how the media works, so they can do it really well. So all these things are happening. What does this mean for the individual scientists? And I just want to say, if I use the stereotype of a lab coat and a microscope, I don't mean to exclude any disciplines. Science communication is about all disciplines, social sciences, humanities, and as well as the natural sciences and even the engineers. I was invited to speak to a group of engineers the other day. That's really a hard sell to get engineers to communicate, but anyway, that's a different story. So when scientists, sign up for a career in research, maybe they don't think about it, that it could involve a lot of public profile, a lot of public engagement. And the question is, what does this mean for scientists, and how do they respond? And how can one help them to do this responsibly, ethically, and effectively? So in my 20 years that I worked with researchers, that was something that I really enjoyed, is engaging directly with scientists and helping them to get their research in the mass media or into educational programs or whatever the objective was at that stage. I found that there's roughly a basic, all of you know the basic distribution curve, the normal curve, and this is true for how scientists respond as well. On the one hand, you have a fairly small group of scientists who say, not interested, it's not my job, you can get a PR person to do it, I'm not speaking to a journalist, leave me alone, don't want to do it. And my opinion is that it is maybe better to leave them alone and not to force them to communicate or engage with the public. Then at the other end of the spectrum, there are the scientists who are just naturally gifted communicators. They love doing it. They find a lot of personal reward in doing it. They see the rewards for their project. They don't need much help, and they will just do it on their own, and they will always look for opportunities. They will always make time for journalists. They will always respond positively if you invite them to participate. But then what is that big bump in the middle? That's where most scientists are, in my experience. And that's a group that says, they kind of, yeah, I'll do it, but I'm not going to do it on my own. I'm needing some help. I need some training. I need you to create the platform. I don't have too much time. I'm willing to spend a little bit of time on this, as long as you take care of the logistics and you make it as easy as possible for me. And also sometimes they will have some kind of conditions. I want to see the article before it's published, or I want to be in control. I want to be the one to decide how this is going to happen. So obviously the group in the middle is the group that you need to work with if you want to improve and the quality and the scope of communication with society. So in my own research, just very briefly, what I'm doing at the moment is I'm really delving deep into what are the factors that motivate or deter scientists from engaging. And broadly speaking, there are three groups of factors. The first one is the biographical factors or socio-demographics, and that's age, discipline, gender, and seniority. And there's some very interesting differences about how younger scientists communicate versus more senior scientists, also the level of their appointment. Of course, gender makes a difference, but studies have shown, across different disciplines, this also differs. But one of the biggest drivers or influencers is discipline. And it's fascinating to see how it differs across disciplines, and there's reasons for that, and that has to do with the norms that govern different disciplines. Unfortunately, I don't have too much time to go into that now, but then the next group of factors is the attitude of the researcher, how they feel about the public, whether they see value in it, whether they think they can do it, whether they think they will be effective, whether they're worried about what their peers will say, and whether they care about, do they need to get approval, that kind of thing. And whether they're also worried about risks, whether they have seen things go wrong, maybe they've had a bad experience with a journalist before and now they don't want to do it in future, that kind of thing all comes in under the attitudes. And then the third big group of factors that influence it is the context, and that's the institutional environment where the scientist is working. And that means, is there a policy in place that either support or maybe control a scientist's engagement with the public? Is there help available? How effective is the media office at the university? What kind of training and resources do they offer? And is the university or the discipline or the organization or the society where the scientist is working offer any kind of recognition and reward for scientists who go the extra mile with public engagement? So, just a quick question. Paulette, when we looked at my presentation this morning, she said, oh, I love him. So she's a fan. You all know who this is? Okay, so Carl Sagan, I guess he's one of my icons of science communication as well. In the science communication world, there's a term that's called the Seguin Effect. Who knows what that is all about? Anybody heard of that? Okay, so what the Seguin Effect is, in his biography, the people who wrote up his life story, there's a lot of evidence that Carl Sagan, despite being a very high-level and eminent astrophysicist, he was denied membership of the National Academy of Science. He was denied tenure at his university. He was actually, to a large extent, shunned by his peers. And from some of the conversations that have actually been documented, there's evidence that the reason why they did not allow him these high-level positions, which he really earned, is that they didn't like the fact that he was such a high-level public figure and that he was such a prolific popularizer of science. So the Seguin Effect today still refers to that idea that if I step out there in the world, it's going to harm my career, my academic career. I run a risk that my peers or my superiors will not like this, and they will think that I'm no longer a serious scientist, because look at him, he's speaking to children, he's talking in simple language about his work, and that's not acceptable if you're a serious scientist. So that's the so-called, that's still known today as the Seguin Effect. But at the other side, as I said, there's increasing expectation and demand on scientists to do exactly that. So the scientist is sort of caught in the middle. What are the risks and what are the rewards? And should I be doing this or shouldn't I be doing this? This book, Escape from the Ivory Tower, was written by Nancy Barron. It's available as an ebook for a few dollars. I can really recommend that. She documents a number of case studies in this book of scientists who were hesitant and reluctant. And then they went through a process. She took them on a journey of planning messages and engaging specific audiences. And then she documents how they were able to influence policies and change things as a result of public engagement. And Nancy Barron draws a very, very direct link between effective public communication and leadership in your field. So she wrote an article also in Nature that's also available online, actually open access, where she says, it's no coincidence that scientists who lead the pack are good communicators. They know how to articulate a vision, focus a debate, and cut to the essence of an argument. They can make a point compelling, even to those who disagree. They talk about their science in ways that make people sit up, take notice, and care. And then I guess the punchline, she says, being a good communicator is not a trade-off. It makes you a better scientist. And this is the other side of the argument, that as long as you just publish in your scholarly journals and just go to your academic conferences within your discipline, your influence will be limited. You may become a leader and recognized in your field, but if you really want to change policies, change the way people think, if you need the public to respond or you need policymakers to take notice, you're going to have to escape from that ivory tower, as she puts it. And so part of my research journey, I was pleased to say, and maybe while we're here, I can take the opportunity to thank Marlene van Wyk, sitting at the back there. She's really been amazing to help me to dig up some of the resources that have inspired me to on this journey of finding out what have scientists said over the years about engaging. And it was really amazing for me to uncover some of these old books, so to find out that science communication, not only goes back to the Middle Ages, but if you look at the last 100, 150 years, it's nothing new. So this book was written in 1897, 190 years ago. Thomas Henry Huxley wrote this about science communication. Some experience of popular lecturing had convinced me that the necessity of making things plain to uninstructed people was one of the very best means of cleaning up the obscure corners of one's own mind. So this made me remember that over the years, whenever I had the opportunity, when I attended a public talk by a prominent scientist, sometimes a Nobel Prize winner that maybe visited South Africa at an international conference, or any other sort of high-profile scientist, when they addressed a public audience, I always try to find a few minutes with them afterwards to ask them, why do you do this? What's in it for you? What is the reward for you? And very, very often, this was the question, the answer I got from them is, yes, science can be lonely. It's wonderful to look into people's eyes and see how they respond about your work. I love engaging with children. But most importantly, it gives me a new perspective on my own work. When you are forced to really think about what you're doing and explain it to people who are not in your field and explain why it's important and why it inspires you, it gives you a new perspective and a new cause to reflect on what you are doing. And I think this is what Thomas Henry Huxley also speaks about here. So it echoes back to that idea, what Nancy Barron said, it makes you a better scientist. About 2-3 decades later, Julian Huxley, not the same one, also a biologist, he lived and worked at the same time of Darwin. He wrote, some men of science seem to think it desirable to offer an apology for a volume of popular essays on their own subject. I do not share this view. One of the duties of scientific men, not necessarily all of them, but certainly some of them taken as a group, is to make available to the lay public the facts and the theories of their science, and especially to try and recreate something of the mental background that is engendered by those facts and those theories. There are a few things in this quote that's interesting for me, is that he talks about a duty, the idea that we owe something back to society because, you know, we are funded by society. But that he also says, maybe not all of them, but at least some of them. So also acknowledging that it is maybe not something for all researchers, but certainly some researchers need to take up this responsibility. And the only criticism I have of this piece is that I would love to say scientific men and women, but okay, given that it was written almost 100 years ago, I'll forgive that. So back to Carl Sagan, I wanted to read you a few of the things that he had said about popularization in some of the books that he wrote. His famous quote simply saying, "Not explaining science seems to me perverse. When you're in love, you want to tell the world." So he was a big, I would say, celebrator of science, just science as something beautiful, something cultural, something that we can enjoy and share with other people, the same way that people love poetry or music or art or theater, and just sort of how inspiring it can be to engage with science. But when you look at part of my study, obviously also includes looking at the barriers, and there are barriers that prevent scientists from doing this, even those who want to. I mean, time is the one that comes up again and again and again. I don't have enough time. I wish I could spend more time on this. The jargon, the technical language, the norms that I've spoken about. What is interesting, though, is that there are a number of studies that show, now this people find it hard to believe, I've got the evidence of peer-reviewed articles that I can send to you, is that the scientists who are most active in engaging the public are also the ones who are most active in publishing in the peer-reviewed literature. So if you think about that, if the ones who are most active in their research and most active in publishing, if they are the ones who are also active in engaging, then surely time can't be too much of an excuse. Yes, it's difficult. Obviously, you have to manage your time, but if the scientists who are most productive can find the time to do it, then certainly that takes care of that excuse to some extent at least. So why is it so difficult? Once again, just a few quotes from famous science popularizers. Richard Dawkins, in The Selfish Gene, he writes, "Expounding ideas that have hitherto appeared only in the technical literature is a difficult art. It requires insightful new twists of language and revealing metaphors. If you push novelty of language and metaphor far enough, you can end up with a new way of seeing, and a new way of seeing can in its own right make an original contribution to science." So once again, coming back to that idea that if you push yourself to get rid of the jargon, to get rid of the technical literature, to make your work accessible and meaningful to people who are not in your field, it can once again give you a new perspective and a new way of seeing what you're doing. And that in itself may be a very positive spin-off that you can use. So Sagan wrote, "Why should it be so hard for scientists to get science across? Some scientists, including some very good ones, tell me that they love to popularize, but they feel they lack the talent in this area. Knowing and explaining, they say, are not the same thing. What's the secret?" So if Sagan says, "What's the secret?" then I would give attention. He says, there's only one, I think. Don't talk to the general audience as you would to your scientific colleagues. Okay? There are terms that convey your meaning instantly and accurately to fellow experts. You may pass these phrases every day in your professional work, but they do no more than mystify an audience of non-specialists. Use the simplest possible language. Above all, remember how it was before you yourself grasp whatever it is that you're explaining. Remember the misunderstandings that you almost fell into and note them explicitly. Keep firmly in mind that there was a time when you didn't understand any of this either. Recapitulate the first steps that led you from ignorance to knowledge. Never forget that native intelligence is widely distributed in our species. Indeed, it is the secret of our success. The effort is slight, the benefits are great. It was interesting for me this morning, without me showing any of this before, and Paulette also made the comment, she says, "I think scientists underestimate the public. They don't realize how interested we are and that we want to engage." And the ability of the public to engage with science is a fascinating topic all on its own, especially when the work is relevant to people. So what we see in public responses to science is that they're not necessarily going to be interested in everything, but they may be interested in a specific disease or a specific nutrition or a specific environmental issue. And they're able to engage deeply and with complex issues in that field if they're interested and if it has meaning and relevance to them. So what Carl Sagan also said, I think just as a final word from him, I hold that popularization of science is successful if, at first, it does no more than spark the sense of wonder. And just saying that, if you do a 1-hour popular talk to a group of teenagers, you don't expect them to understand what your research is about that. You just want to inspire them and create an interest, and that's all you should set out to do. And then, so depending on the kind of engagement, you should be realistic about your objectives. So to come back then briefly about, why is it important, why does it matter? What I've mentioned already a few of is the benefits for the researcher, him or herself. Getting a profile, getting recognition, attracting funding, attracting policymakers' interest. There's a number of objectives that the individual researcher can achieve with effective communication. Of course, for the organization, there's the PR value, building its profile, showing, Stellenbosch University and UCT and WITS, they're competing. They want people to take note of the research they're doing, and they want to attract collaborators, attract the top students in the country. Society, of course, they fund the science, they have an interest, they need to be able to make informed decisions about issues that affect their everyday life, and getting something back from the scientific community is at least a democratic right, if you think about it. And then the last one there is the idea that many scientists do this. Maybe they don't have the objectives in mind of influence or funding or reputation or profile. They do it for the cause. They're working on something that they feel passionate about, and they want people to take note. It could be something to do with conservation, it could be something to do with violence in the communities. It could be something that they chose that field of research because they're passionate about it, and they want people to know about it so that it can change behaviors or lead to new policies or whatever. So towards the sort of second part or last part of my presentation, I thought I've given you a few ideas of why it matters, what kind of benefits, what kind of barriers there are. And I would like to give you now a few places to think about, places to start, places to connect, things to think about. And acknowledging that some of you in the room are already doing some of these things, maybe not all of you, and so different things may be relevant or interesting to different people. The first thing, and this is a hard one, so I thought I'd start with that, is to say that there is no one-size-fits-all solution for science communication. Every project, every department, every research group really needs to sit down and invest a little bit of time in planning, whether at an individual level as a researcher or whether in the group where you work, and think about a few of the basic questions that you need to answer when you draw up a science communication plan, or any communication plan for that matter. And the basic questions are, who needs to know about our work? Just saying, I want the general public as an audience is definitely not going to work. You're setting yourself up for failure from the start. So you really need to think about measurable, achievable group of people that you want to engage with. And then what is it that you want to achieve? If you do this well, what kind of effects are you looking for? What are your goals and your objectives? Then really investing a bit of time in your key messages, crafting them carefully so that they're jargon-free and relevant and compelling and memorable. And there's a whole lot of resources about that I can make available for you. There's just this art of message design in science. And then, of course, thinking about when in the research cycle, are there reasons why we can't communicate before we publish this research? Are there opportunities for engagement along the way? But just thinking about the timing is also very important. Then, of course, the tools and tactics. It happens so often that a research group will decide, we have interesting project. What shall we do? Okay, let's print a brochure. So often, when I was still a practitioner, I would get a call and a scientist would say, we have 10,000 rand, can you help us to do a brochure? Or can you help us to do a poster? And they haven't even thought about whether a brochure or poster is necessarily going to be the best way to meet the objectives of that specific communication. So I'm very skeptical about printed products these days. There's a place for it sometimes, but with the communication landscape changing, you also have to think about other tools and tactics. And then, of course, the hard one, to build in from the start a little bit of evaluation, to say, did this work? Did I achieve what I set out to do? And to think from the start about how you're going to evaluate. And then, of course, in your action plan, you need to think about, do I have the budget and the resources and the skills? I mean, if I plan for this from the start, at the time, before the research even starts, at the time when I budget, then maybe it's possible to put a line in there with a budget for communication so that you don't come at the end and say, we would have loved to do X, Y, and Z, but we have no money to do it. So, and that is why it's so important to think about communication right at the beginning of the conceptualization phase of a research project so that you can plan and budget for it, and so that you can also evaluate it and keep on doing it better. For me, that's the ultimate goal of evaluation, is improving what you do next time. Not to find fault, just to improve what you do in the next round. Probably one of the golden laws of effective communication is to know the audience, to make a bit of an effort to understand this group that you are now targeting. As I said in the beginning, that's also a basic principle of engagement, to understand their possible concerns and expectations from your science. And then to think about, when you think about the ways that you're going to do this, am I going to do public talks? Am I going to have a Twitter account? Am I going to have a Facebook page? To invest a little bit in those things. What I always tell scientists, if you decide that I'm going to do public talks at youth groups or schools as one of my ways of reaching out to my immediate community, it makes sense to invest a little bit of time in a really good, engaging, compelling talk, because you can use it numerous times. You don't have to start from scratch every time you get an invitation, or invest in a really good visual that explains what your research is about, or invest in one really good photo shoot where you spend maybe 3,000 or 5,000 rand on getting a professional photographer for an hour or two and getting a really good set of visuals that you can then use on your social media, on your presentations, and really get good value for money out of that investment. The other thing is that I mentioned earlier about traditional media, newspapers, going through a very hard time. It's changing very fast. In a country like South Africa, radio is still a very important medium, but it is important for scientists to get an idea of the mass media landscape, because it is still a very important tool that you can use in your communication. And that also means understanding what journalists want and what works for them, what they're looking for when you interview a journalist, and really understanding their limitations as well. The fact that their copy is edited by another editor, the fact that they need to that they're not writing for scientists, they're writing for their readers or their listeners. It's also, I think, not possible any longer to say, okay, I'll do all of this as long as I don't have to be on social media, because social media is where it's happening and where things are really cooking in terms of science communication. And so we know that there's so many channels in social media, no one can keep up with all of them, but my advice would be to go and look where your peers and where your discipline is active on social media, and choose 2 or 3 channels. You don't have to be on every single channel that there is, but choose 2 or 3 channels and really make an effort to engage there, because it can be an incredibly powerful tool. What is really interesting is some of the, once again, peer-reviewed research that's been published recently proving how Twitter, for example, can significantly boost the citation rate and the download rate of your peer-reviewed article. So there's a number of studies that have shown that scientists who tweet effectively and who do it know how Twitter works, that they can really get more attention for their research that way. And across all these platforms, whether it's the traditional media, whether you're talking to general audience in a, say, a public school, a public talk in a school, or a science cafe, or on Twitter, on social media, a lot of it revolves around stories, making your research. That's what the general audience wants. They want you to make your research more personal, to step away a little bit from the impersonality and the abstraction of your the way that you would speak to your peers, and tell them, why did I get involved in this field? What makes me interested? Why am I worried? Why am I excited? What am I hoping to achieve in the next 10 years? Tell a story about a field trip. Tell a story about a specific research project. Stories really drive effective communication, and stories are memorable, stories are shared. When you just bombard people with facts, they forget almost all of it a few hours later. But when you give them stories, they're more likely to go and retell the story to a friend and to remember what you spoke about. And the fact that facts alone is not enough is also hard for scientists. But again, there's some very interesting social science research proving now that bombarding people with facts will often turn them off, will turn them against the science, and will definitely not be effective in changing their behavior in a positive way. And it also comes back to that idea of moving away from what I said right at the beginning, a deficit-style communication, and moving towards more one-on-one engagement with people, or in groups engagement with people. Obviously not always. There's always going to be opportunities. I mean, what I'm doing here now is deficit-style communication, and actually it's not good. So we should have more opportunities to really talk to each other. Another big barrier for people can be very technical language, too much data, too much jargon, as we said, and it means, finding ways of communicating without that. And it does mean that you might have to think about the last 10 years of research I would love to tell people about, but what I really should do is find that tiny little morsel, that one little slice inside that's relevant to people, and focus on that. Don't try and communicate too much. There's a book that was written about this topic where they talk about the curse of knowing too much, because if you know too much, you try and share too much. So it's a real skill to say, today with this group or with this journalist, I'm just going to focus on that tiny bit because that's what matters now, and this is what they are interested in. Another challenging thing for scientists, but I think also an exciting trend, is to think about new and novel ways that you could possibly share your science. To get away a little bit from the, just the brochure or just the poster or just another newsletter. The Dance Your PhD competition is actually sponsored and run by Science magazine, the magazine that you all know, that's the weekly magazine from the AAAS. And in the science communication world, there is so many exciting opportunities these days for art and science collaborations, for making it creative, using drama, using poetry, using visual art, working with science centers. There's these opportunities, and I think it's just I just wanted to put it out there to say, be open-minded about that, and think about ways that you and your students and your colleagues can maybe get involved in something completely different for a change. Of course, in this whole environment, we have to be aware that the internet is changing everything. It's changing the way we communicate. It's changing the way people learn. And it is important when you put things online to think about how people interact with information online. When you look at what social science, behavioral scientists especially are telling us, they say that people online, they use the term they are cognitive misers. Now that's jargon. So what I understand it to mean is that people are lazy when they go online. They don't want to engage with very complex information. It's often late at night. It may be in bed. It may be on a bus somewhere, whatever. So putting information out online, it's very, very important how you do it, that it's simple, that it's short sentences, easy to scroll, easy to click, easy to engage with. Another big challenge of the online world is that the algorithms that are existing behind some of these platforms, you've heard of filter bubbles, I'm sure. This idea that every time you click on something, it gets recorded in these algorithms. And so what happens is you get sent more of the information that you liked before, and you get shielded from information that you don't agree with. And so you end up in these filter bubbles where you just live in a world where everybody agrees with what you agree with. And it's dangerous because in science, when people, for example, one of the very vocal and aggressive groups online worldwide is the anti-vaccination movement, trying to advise mothers not to vaccinate their babies. And if you engage with those with the information, which I've done just as a trial, then I see, I click on dangers of vaccination, reasons not to vaccinate your baby, that kind of thing. Then over the next few days, I get sent more and more and more of those links. That it reinforces the things that you already believe in, and that's obviously quite dangerous. Maybe to get back to a little bit of inspiration, I think one of the things that you can do if you're interested and want to get more involved with this is to look at what other communicating scientists are doing. There are icons of communication around the world, but there are also icons of communication right here in South Africa, and see how they do it. Learn from their examples and see what you can take that you can use. And the other thing is that if you budget and plan for communication, you don't necessarily need to do it all alone. I think actually it's impossible to do it on your own. These days, science communication depends on infographics, sometimes interactive web pages, collaborations with drama and art and playwrights and etc. So once again, think about, can you do it with other people? As an example, I'm working with a graphic designer now on my online course on science communication. I'm getting her to draw illustrations and cartoons that I'm going to help to illustrate. I mean, I can't do it. I don't have the skill. I know what the cartoon has to say. So, if you can find opportunities to partner with people who have certain skills, especially with photographers and videographers, to get good quality photos and good quality clips of your work, that can be gold in science communication. It may mean that some of this will take you a little bit outside your comfort zone, but I think that's good always in a research career. And it may mean that you may have to think about getting some training, some media training, social media training, public speaking training, popular science writing, whatever it is that you feel that you or your group most need. I've been involved in media training and other kinds of science communication training over the years, and it is remarkable to see the difference that it makes once scientists get an opportunity to engage in a safe space with journalists or with other science writers, and just to sort of build their own confidence in doing it, so that when they go out next time, it's not so new and it's not so scary. It does take preparation. It does take a lot of planning. It doesn't just happen by itself. I think that's important to remember. So a few just local things that you can look at. I see outside the research office has a stand. If you go out just to the right, Stellenbosch University has a knowledge directory. If you're willing to talk about your work or to engage with the public, make sure that your name is on there so that you are listed as one of the scientists that can be contacted for interviews. Look at the university's own platforms and publications. They've just published this research at Stellenbosch, the 2015 edition. I think there's also some copies out here. Alison is nodding, and she's also handed out New Voices in Science. So look at the things that are available on your own campus where you don't have to make a major effort to be featured. You can approach the research office or the media office at the university and become a part of the effort that way, maybe just writing an article, and there's help available from them. I mean, I was picking up a copy of DiMarti yesterday. If you look at the student newspaper, there's actually a surprising amount of research featured in there. So there's another platform where if you've got something that's relevant to students, where you can offer to write an article. There's a Marty's FM studio right here in the NLC. They're always keen to interview people about interesting topics. There may be departmental newsletters or faculty newsletters where your work can be featured. So what I'm trying to say is, if you don't feel ready to go and be featured in The Guardian or on CNN, you can start locally. You can start on your own campus, and I think that's actually the best place to start. Look at what social media channels are available inside your own discipline, inside your own faculty, inside your own university. And when you tweet about your research, you add their handle so that they pick it up and they can retweet it for you, and that way you can spread your information much more effectively. The Faculty of Natural Sciences is just one example. They organize from time to time these science cafes. Look at the Science Cafe Stellenbosch Facebook page and Twitter feed, and go and attend some of them, and then you'll see how the other scientists do it. And once you've attended 2 or 3, go and speak to the organizers and offer to become one of the presenters. So anybody who doesn't know what a science cafe is, how it works? Okay, no? Okay, so I don't have to think. Then another platform, I wonder how many of you know about the Conversation Africa. I see a few nods. Yeah, so the University of Stellenbosch is one of the supporters of that platform, and I just want to quickly show you Conversation Africa. If you go, you can go and look per university, and you can go and see which articles have been published, and there's just a selection of some of the ones that have been published by Stellenbosch University academics. So you can go and look what your colleagues have written about. They make it very, very easy for you to write. And if you submit a story to the Conversation Africa, they've got a team of journalists on their end that help you to shape it. And the whole purpose of the Conversation Africa is a platform for other media to pick up stories from. So the whole idea is it's there, anybody can access it, but it's a source of stories for the mass media as well. So I would really encourage you, if you haven't sort of engaged with the site before, go and look at how they write. It's good science writing. The Conversation Africa has this strapline, academic rigor, journalistic flair. And I think they're actually doing that quite well. It's solid articles, but it's written in a very engaging and very accessible way. And then one other resource I wanted to show you was this guide. DRUSA is a terrible acronym, but it stands for Development Research Uptake in Sub-Saharan Africa, and it's a project that I assisted them over the last few months to write an online science communication guide. And it's open access, freely available, and the guide has It is aimed more at communicators than scientists, but the principles are basically the same. There is a whole section on defining what science communication is all about and all the models and the roles and so on. And then there's a whole section on practical skills, how to plan. A lot of the things I've just briefly mentioned today, there's a lot of detail there. Popular writing, writing for the web, using images correctly, etc. So you're more than welcome to find that online, and it's, as I say, it's free. You can download it, you can use it any way you want. So I'll tell you, just show you quickly the online. It's just http:// and then researchcommunicationguide.drusa.net. But if you don't find it, if you don't have time to write it now, you're welcome to contact me. I'll give you the link. Then, for those of you who want sort of a bit of inspiration, we've created a Facebook page called Science Communication Africa. It's got close to 1,000 members from all over the continent and other parts of the world. It's a place where you can ask questions. You can say, I'm speaking to a group of teenagers next week and I need to do X, whatever. Can anybody give me advice? You can ask anything to do with science communication, or if you come across an interesting article, you can share it there. If you find if you have an interesting product that you'd like to share, that you'd like to market, a science communication video or whatever, you can put it there. So all you have to do is, when you log onto Facebook, just search for Science Communication Africa and ask to join, and I'd be happy to welcome you there. And then last thing I thought I'd mention is at Crest, where I work, which is just over here in the Wilcox building, we have an online course in science communication it runs for 6 weeks every year. And it's basically designed for communicators, but also for researchers who want to get to grips with the ins and outs of science communication. So in a way, it's designed for people who are not on the campus because it's a distance learning course. But of course, there's nothing that prevents anybody who is on the campus to take part, and it is a fully university accredited short course. At Crest also, maybe my last bit of promotion for my own organization is we're starting next year a new MPhil with a specialization in public science engagement. It's a new specialization field that we are starting, and it's connected to the fact that we have the chair in science communication at Crest. So if anybody's interested in doing a master's, you're also more than welcome to talk to me about that. We have a few minutes left that I want to use for a quick case study of something that happened last week, or for questions. So let me first see if there's any burning questions, any issue, something you don't agree with. Yes?
Can I just ask a question? When we write peer-reviewed papers, we know we get evaluators and check our peers. How do you make sure that science communicated in the public media is correct? I attended the lecture the other day, it was on packaging, food packaging, and the presenter showed a video clip talking to people in supermarkets. How do they feel about eating using microwaves? And still today, people are scared of using microwaves.
those wristbands that will increase your, your longevity, or all these things that are basically pseudoscience that's out there. So I think that's maybe the only thing I can say. Make peace with the fact that there's always going to be a lot of incorrect information out there, but at least contribute the other side, contribute the correct information. So when you talk to the public or journalists, you will tell them how to judge the credibility of the story. And one of the things they will look for is, who is the person speaking? Is that person a recognized researcher? Has that person got a track record of peer review publication? Is that person associated with the university? So if you're out there, then at least you provide that other side of information that can be trusted.
Thank you very much. I just want to, regarding our question right now, there's something I want to ask from you. Is that recently in South Africa, there has been a huge development in terms of researcher and communicating with the community, especially the dynamics of this space. But there's one thing that still I'm not clear about, in that we have some researchers who are very, very willing now, very open to the public. They want to go out there to settle issues in your communities here and there. But there are other researchers who believe science must remain in the university. What does academic has to do with issues in township, issues concerning racial, issues like, for instance, transformation? All throughout last year, I was in UCT, that's at UCT as a student. And we have a lot of rallies, conversations here and there. And why some, even academic professors, university lecturers, we are trying to dish out articles, going to the community, organizing, but some are still saying, no, that's not a business, just focus on the topic here in university. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that is going to be one of your challenges, one of your barriers. If your superiors or your director in your research unit, whatever, doesn't approve of you going out to the public, I think all I can say is it's definitely something that's changing. There's definitely more pressure, even on the senior academics, to show that they're doing something for the public. Just to give you one example, yesterday we had a meeting at CRES with the National Research Foundation, who funds all the centers of excellence in the universities across South Africa. So they brought all the centers of excellence together at Stellenbosch and UCT. And I mean, the message from the NRF was loud and clear. The minister and the parliamentary portfolio committee on science want to see broader impacts from your research. You've got to tell us what are you doing to make your work accessible and visible to the communities, and how it's changing lives and improving livelihoods of the community. So I think there are still some academics who resist it and who say, no, it's not your job and whatever. But I think the only thing you can do is to engage with them, to talk to them, to show them evidence that it is actually becoming more and more accepted as a part of the job of an academic. And there's different ways of doing it. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to go in front of the camera, using a platform like the conversation. I think also if really top scientists see that other top scientists are doing it, you can show them some examples. Look at the other A-rated scientists in the university. Look at how they are doing it. Look how they are getting involved. Look at the benefits they are getting. That's the only advice I can give. But it can be a struggle if you have somebody who feels, very much against it, and if that person is in a position to stop you. But don't give up. That's what I'm saying. Okay. I thought maybe literally in just a minute or two, I'll just show you. Some of you may have read over the last week, there was a story in the news about sharks, the white sharks around South Africa's coast. So this was a nice case study for me of science communication. Professor Dr. Sarah Andriachi here at Stellenbosch University, she worked very closely with Vida Basson, who is the media officer. She said to me afterwards she could never have done it on her own. She needed to work with a person who knows the media, knows how to do it. They had a press release, they had a very active campaign on Twitter. And what they did on Twitter is they went and they looked for all the people worldwide who tweet about sharks and about shark conservation. And then they tagged them, or well, I guess the right word is tagged, in the press releases, so that those people who have thousands and hundreds of thousands of followers picked up that there was some new shark research coming out of Stellenbosch University. They issued their press release to the media with some really nice, compelling visuals, and that photo of the shark with his seal meal was used quite extensively in the media, on the front page of some newspapers. And they also issued really good broadcast quality video clips to bring the research to life that they also shared on social media. She wrote an article as well for the conversation. If you have a big announcement like this, a lot of planning goes into it to get the timing right so that you don't break the embargo of the peer-reviewed publication, but on the day that the peer-reviewed publication appears, you also have a lot of other things appearing on the same day. So it takes a bit of planning and work beforehand. They had really amazing coverage around the world, and not only in South Africa, but in influential platforms around the world. And I spoke to Sarah Unroti afterwards. She's back in the field again now, counting sharks, and she said to me, as I said, she could never have done it without the media officer. She said that for her, the reason for doing it was just about one thing, and it's about the sharks. It's about the message of urgent conservation measures needed. We have only between 350 and about 500 sharks left. They've proved that now from 6 years of population and genetic studies. And if we don't do something really, really urgently, the white sharks will definitely go extinct. So that was for her the driver behind doing it, the reason for doing it, the reason for carrying on with the research. And she said that the only thing that was really, really hard is going on live radio and on live television. You have to be really, really well prepared, because she wrote here to me, if you make a mistake, thousands of people are listening or watching. So that is, you have to be confident and really well prepared when you go in for something like this. But she said, I asked her, would you do anything differently next time? And she said, actually, with the work that went into this time, the positive feedback has been beyond their expectations, and the coverage they've achieved around the world. So for her, this was a very rewarding experience, a very worthwhile experience. Imagine if that peer-reviewed article ended up just in the journal where it was published without any further exposure. That would not get the attention. In this case specifically, they want to get the attention of conservation policymakers. So, as I say, there's not all research will be a big announcement like that. That was just one example, but there's, as I said, not one size fits all. There's many, many different ways of doing it.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending this session. And Marina, brilliant. So if any of the scientists want to start engaging, please by all means. This is ready to speak to. I just want to make two announcements, which is very good, because what Marina has been telling us this morning is, go and engage with your community, take your research out there. This afternoon at 1 o'clock, we actually have a follow-up. We actually have a lady who loves sharing her research with the community. She takes the science and she goes and supports people out there. So if you want to find out how she's doing it, she will be here this afternoon. She's got Knox from Makunga. She's partnering and she's holiday. Yes, she's fabulous. Yeah. So if you want to come listen to her, she's going to be at 1 o'clock. Also got another thing going. We've got tours, guided tours of our special collections. So all the good stuff of South Africa that is not always there for the public eye to see is now on display in our special collections. So please go and